Good morning, everybody. I am Jean Peralta from the Western Pacific Regional Office covering health and the environment. I am very pleased to meet you all again. Some of you I met during the October 29 refresher course. Thank you so much for attending this WSP Auditing training program that is part of WHO and DFAT's overall support to drinking water safety. We truly appreciate the trainers, Daryl and Angela, for all their great preparations on this week's event. This has been very well prepared to be effective from the original face-to-face training to this virtual or online course. With the earlier experience in the refresher course, I think this will be another integrative approach to learning. As you can see, this virtual bi-regional training with both WPRO and SEARO has very low carbon footprint. So it is good for our climate. Our region has made considerable progress in the 2 decades, with most countries achieving global targets for drinking water. However, we still have nearly 90 million people in the Western Pacific region that do not have basic drinking water facility. So the affordable and safely managed drinking water can reduce this number dramatically. In WPRO, we follow the 2019 resolution of the World Health Assembly and has put WASH in healthcare facilities as a priority. And we work with our other units to make this happen. Several countries in WPRO, mostly represented here, have made great progress on WASH and water safety plans in the last 5 years, and I hope they will continue to expand their valuable efforts. WHO will continue to support member states for ensuring water safety and achieving SDG goals, especially SDG 3 on health and SDG 6 on access to safe water supply and sanitation. This week's training is a great opportunity for all of us to build the capacity for our water safety plan auditing. I'm expecting this virtual event could add to your considerable experience with water safety planning and look forward to strengthening water safety plan audit practices for countries in WPRO and SEARO. I believe this training will provide all of you the detailed guidance and tools on planning, carrying out, and following up a WSP audit. Once again, I thank you for participating in this training, and I hope that after this 1 week training, all of you will contribute to achieving the desired results of safe access to drinking water for all in your respective countries. I wish you all a productive learning experience. Thank you very much. Now over to you, Rashid from SEARO.
Thank you, Jean. Good morning to all participants and facilitators. I'm Hussein Rashid, Regional Advisor, WASH and Climate Change from WHO SEARO. We had a really good introductory WSP training day last week, and we are ready to go with WSP audit training part for the next 4 days. Water safety and improving the quality is part of the focus and priority areas for the Southeast Asia region as well. And we have been working in ways to address this through capacity building of member states. This is a really good opportunity given the circumstances, as we were able to organize this training virtually. Thanks to Daryl and Angela and the team from WPRO and SEARO. Which we believe that you will be able to, all the participants will be able to make the maximum use of this. This is a very early morning for some of you, and the attendance shows the enthusiasm you all have. I don't want to take much of the time, and I'm not going to repeat what Jean has already said. So let's start the sessions up and running. And as it was very interesting and engaging last time around, I'm confident all participants will actively engage in all the group works and sessions during the trainings. I wish you all every success. Thank you, and over to you, Daryl.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending what time of the day it is. My name is Daryl Jackson, and I'm one of the trainers for these 5 days. I've been working on and off with WHO in water safety planning for about 20 years, and I've been a key trainer on water safety planning, including auditing. I've also been involved in many related WHO publications and have done many WSP assessments and audits in the Asia region. I've met several of you over the years, and nowadays I'm living in Australia. My co-trainer is Angela, so over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Daryl. And hello, everyone. Greetings from Oregon, USA, where right now it is 6 p.m. and snowing outside. My name is Angela Reinhold, and I work for the water quality team at WHO headquarters. I've been working on various aspects of water safety planning for about 15 years now, as a trainer, an auditor, and also as an implementer when I used to work for a water supplier where water safety plans were mandatory and subject to regulatory auditing. Like Daryl, I've had the pleasure of working with many of you through the years, and I'm happy we can all come together for this training event. So welcome, and thanks one and all for being here. Back to you, Daryl.
We've got people from about 15 countries have registered, and I'm just going to list the countries. And apologies if I miss one, but because there's quite a lot of people involved here. We've got people from Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, the People's Democratic Republic of Laos, Maldives, Mongolia, Myanmar, Nepal, Philippines, Republic of Korea, Sri Lanka, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. So I hope I've covered everybody. We have one of the groups from Timor-Leste who have about 8 people in their room. So there's more people than you may see on your participants list. We've got representatives from the Ministries of Health, Environment. We have representatives from water suppliers, WHO officers, and many more. You will get a chance to introduce yourselves to some of these people during some breakout room activities during the week. Now, there's a wide range of WSP auditing expertise in this room, and some of these people could actually do the training themselves. So you'll have some really good people to meet with during the week. We've designed this training program to have something for everyone, regardless of your entry point. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, and we'd like everyone to have an opportunity to show your faces. So I'd like you to turn your videos on very briefly and keep yourselves muted, please. And then what we'll do is when everyone's up on the screen, Han and Faustina will take a couple of snapshots of the screen. So please put yourselves up on the screen so we can see all your lovely smiling faces. So this training over the next 5 days is based on these 2 documents. First of all, there's a practical guide to auditing water safety plans, and we'll be supplementing that this week with some additional tools. And secondly, this training reflects the 11 WSP steps in the WHO IWA Water Safety Plan Manual. So this training targets WSP audits for the larger sort of urban supplies. Now, the same principles apply for smaller systems, although these require some tailored tools and processes, which you will find in the auditing guide if you will be working on smaller community-based systems. This workshop has been designed for those who already have a strong understanding of WSP processes, and those who will be participating in audits and or will be involved in training auditors. And these are our training objectives for this week. By the end of this workshop this week, you should be able to, first of all, describe the what, why, who, and when of auditing. Secondly, you should be able to list what an auditor should do before, during, and after an audit. And thirdly, locate and use various forms and tools available to support the auditing process, and that together should allow you to apply this knowledge to support WSP auditing in a national context. We have a lot of time together this week, 2 hours per day for the next 5 days. So we hope you find this time enjoyable as well as educational. We've done our best to design a program that's interactive and hopefully a little bit of fun for all of us as we go along the day. So here's our program this week. Today we cover the WSP steps and key terms, and the what, why, who, and when of auditing. Tomorrow, we'll discuss how to prepare for an audit and how to find and use available audit tools, which I'm sure you'll find very helpful when you get familiar with that. On day 3, we'll cover effective information gathering both before and during an audit. And then we'll also discuss how you assign scores to the audit questions that you'll be using. And on day 4, we'll be discussing some challenging questions and audit wrap-ups, and also discussing considerations for audit schemes, for example, having national WSP auditing schemes. We'll spend some time considering key issues when setting up these, although most of our training focuses on carrying out individual audits. We'll have some of these higher level considerations like training and certifying auditors and so on. And on the last day, we'll review the activities and the supporting resources so you can go and apply this information. Throughout the week, we'll have some visiting experts as well who will have some very good perspectives.
Thank you, Daryl, for setting out the workshop objectives and overview. Before we launch into the material on auditing, let's first talk a bit about WSPs. So because an auditor must thoroughly understand water safety plans first and foremost, let's take some time today to review the WSP steps and key terms. A water safety plan is a comprehensive risk assessment and risk management approach that includes all the steps in the water supply chain from the catchment to the consumer. So it's an approach to managing the whole of the water supply system to proactively ensure water safety. And it's a well-established approach that's been implemented in more than 90 countries in every region of the world, including most, if not all, of your own countries. And as Daryl mentioned, this training is based on the WHO IWA Water Safety Plan Manual, which was published in 2009, and that targets larger formalized water supply systems. As Daryl mentioned, water safety plans certainly apply to smaller systems, and WHO has separate guidance documents published to support small system water safety. So this 2009 manual sets out 11 water safety plan steps that are shown on your slide here. And so rather than reading these steps to you, as many of you are already quite familiar with them, let's do an activity to check in on our WSP knowledge. So this will be the first of many breakout room activities that we'll do together over the next 5 days, and it'll allow you to interact with one another. So in a moment, Daryl will be randomly assigning all of you to different rooms of 6 or so people. And before he does, I'll explain to you what your task will be when you get to your breakout room. So the first thing you'll do is everyone will take out a sheet of paper, which you can actually do now if you'd like to get a jump start. And you'll write down the numbers 1 through 5 on that piece of paper as is shown here on the slide. And then working in groups, what you'll do is you'll write down the titles of the first 5 modules or steps of a water safety plan using the clues on the next slide. So this is the activity. On the left, we have a list of WSP steps with the titles of the first 5 steps missing. And those missing titles are shown in the boxes on the right side of the screen. So your group task is to fill in the blanks using those missing titles. Here's an example. The first step in water safety planning is to form the team. So you look for the box on the right, which has to do with forming a water safety plan team. And there it is. And so you'll write WSP team formation next to number 1 on your sheet of paper. So in your groups, you'll work out the remaining missing titles. Now, just a moment ago, Daryl asked you to download that PDF file with activity instructions. So you want to open up that file and refer to activity 1 to see the slides that I just presented. And you can have a look at that in your breakout room sessions. So I hope your task is clear. In just a moment, Daryl will send you to your breakout room. And once you get to your room, you'll have 8 minutes there before you're automatically brought back to this main room. So you'll receive a notification when you have 2 minutes remaining before you'll leave the room. And no doubt you'll want to introduce yourself to your colleagues, but we suggest you say only a brief hello, maybe your name and your country, because the time will pass quickly. And lastly, we'll have some facilitators that will be popping in and out of your breakout rooms to answer any questions that you may have. Daryl, is there anything that you would like to add or correct, including possibly warning everyone about accidentally exiting the meeting?
No, just a note for you, Angela, that you're going to go into a room straight away. Can you just pop out? I cannot not include you.
Okay, well then, Daryl, then I'll give the warning about accidentally exiting the meeting. And Daryl, you can add any clarification. There's no need, I understand, for you to manually exit your breakout room, as at the end of the session, you'll just automatically come back. But be warned that there is an option to exit the meeting, which is something that you definitely don't want to do, because then you'll be unassigned from your breakout room. So take care not to do that.
Okay, so I'm now going to send you to your rooms. You'll automatically be sent to a room. You'll meet the other people, and then your timing of 8 minutes starts from the moment I push this button. Obviously, you would have all known that number 1 was the WSP team formation. So no prizes if you got number 1 right. Okay. And the WSP team is responsible for doing the next 4 modules. And there's a clear sequence in the next 4 modules. So after forming the WSP team, the system description must be developed. And the system description provides the foundation for identifying hazards and hazardous events in module 3. And you cannot identify hazards and hazardous events until you really understand the system, which is what you did in module 2. And having identified what could go wrong, because that's what hazards and hazardous events do, you then move on to module 4, where you identify what controls are already in place to manage these hazardous events. And only then can you assess the risks of the system while taking into account the existing control measures. And then in module 5, you ask what needs to be improved and how do we do that in an incremental way. That is improvement planning, so that we can reduce the risk where the risk is unacceptable. Very good. Most of you got all 5 because you had 1 to start with. So everybody should have at least got 1 right. And then obviously 3 and 4, if you got 1 of them wrong, you weren't going to get the next one right. So I hope you now understand the logic between those modules. You develop a team, then you do a system description so you understand it. Then you identify what could go wrong, hazardous and hazardous events, do the risk assessment, and then do improvement plans.
Okay, so now that we are refreshed on the steps of a WSP, let's take some time to talk about WSP terminology. So water safety planning has a language associated with it, and auditors need to be fluent in the language of water safety planning to be sure that key concepts have been understood and applied by water safety plan teams. So let's briefly review some of the key terms in water safety planning. Module 3 introduces the terms hazard and hazardous event. And these are really important terms in water safety planning. A hazard is a chemical, physical, microbial, or radiological agent that can cause harm to public health. And a hazardous event is an event or situation that introduces hazards to or fails to remove them from the water supply. Daryl, is Lynn available by chance to give us an example of a hazard and hazardous event?
Yeah, I'll just see if she's around. Just a moment.
Thanks, Daryl. While you're checking, Daryl, I'll just take a minute to explain to our participants who Lynn is. Lynn Jackson is Daryl's wife. Now, Daryl has been leading these trainings for many, many years now. And when he's preparing, he tends to bounce ideas off of his wife, Lynn. This way, through the years, Lynn has become something of a WSP expert herself, whether she's wanted to or not. So I'm going to ask Lynn to give us a couple examples. How are we tracking, Daryl?
Here I am.
Hi, Lynn.
Everybody. Oh boy. Oh, I've just been flat out. Sorry.
I hope everyone can see Lynn. I see that she's all kitted out in bicycle gear. Lynn, it looks like you are a regular bicycle rider.
Yes. I've just popped down to the shops to do a bit of shopping, but I'm okay now. I've just caught my breath. Oh, I tell you what, it's wild out there, but it's not as bad as it was when I used to ride a bicycle in Kathmandu. Boy, that was tough. I tell you, that's not an activity for the faint-hearted or the nervous. You've got to have a strong heart for that. And there are hazards everywhere.
Yikes. Lynn, could you please give us an example of a hazard and hazardous event in everyday life?
Well, there's tons of different road hazards, of course. There's holes in the road that suddenly appear, and there's all sorts of other things. But the one I've chosen to talk about this morning is road traffic. Now, as you would know, if you've ever been to Kathmandu, you would know that there are cars everywhere, trucks and micros and buses and motorcyclists and cyclists, all hooting and squeezing into every available space. So that's the kind of hazard I'm talking about.
Definitely not for the faint-hearted.
Oh, you're right there. I tell you, a hazardous event for a cyclist in a place like Kathmandu is being hit from behind because another road user failed to see you. And that was what I was always the most frightened of.
Quite rightly. Thank you, Lynn. Those are great examples. Appreciate it. So some key terms from Module 4 of the WSP process are control measure, validation, and risk. So a control measure is an activity or a process to prevent or eliminate a water safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Validation means obtaining evidence that the control measure is capable of effectively controlling the hazard. And risk is a combination of the likelihood that a hazardous event will occur combined with the severity of its consequences. Lynn, since we've still got you here with us, could you build on the example of hazard and hazardous event that you just gave us and provide examples of these other terms?
Oh, of course. Having lived with Daryl for so long, they're like second language to me. Now, first of all, a control measure. There are lots of control measures, but probably the most important one to avoid being hit by traffic is to be really visible. And as you can see, I take visibility very seriously. I mean, things like lights, having light-coloured or bright-coloured clothes, wearing a neon safety vest with lights if you can, having reflectors, all of these things, and especially on rainy days or in the evening.
That all sounds very sensible.
And I would validate that by checking with a friend. I could ask them, can you see my lights? Can you see them from 20 metres, 30 metres? Can you see my vest? Am I visible? So checking is really important.
I see. And can you tell us your view on what the risk would be of this hazardous event?
Yeah, now I thought about this for a long time. The likelihood of being hit in Kathmandu traffic is pretty high because the traffic is so chaotic. So I'd put that risk at about a 4 out of 5. Severity is a bit more difficult because generally the traffic's pretty slow. So if you do get knocked off, you're likely okay, provided you're wearing a helmet and protective clothing, of course. And I've had a couple of those experiences with just a few scrapes and bruises. But if it was a truck or a big bus that hit you, well, you'd be well and truly in trouble. So I think that you could put the risk, severity risk at about a 5. So that gives a score of 20, which is pretty high.
Indeed. Well, very good, Lynn. Thank you so much for those great examples. We might be recruiting you as a trainer for our next event.
Oh,
until then, be safe out there.
All right, I'll see you later, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. She really has learned a lot through the years, hasn't she, Daryl? Okay. In Module 6, we have a key term, and that's operational monitoring. Operational monitoring is routine monitoring to confirm that a control measure continues to work properly. It includes water quality monitoring and visual inspections. And finally, another key term is found in Module 7, and that is the term verification. Verification means checks conducted to confirm that the water safety plan as a whole is working as planned. Verification comprises 3 elements, which we could remember as this verification triangle. So those elements are compliance monitoring to confirm that drinking water complies with water quality standards, consumer satisfaction monitoring, and auditing, which is of course the topic of this training. Daryl, could you please explain in your own words the difference between compliance monitoring, which is covered here in Module 7, and operational monitoring, which is covered in Module 6? I see both can involve water quality testing. So are they the same thing?
Well, yes, well, good question, Angela, and it can cause a bit of confusion. The key distinction is why the monitoring is being done. So operational monitoring in Module 6 is designed to ensure that the control measure continues to function correctly. Its focus is clearly on control measures. On the other hand, compliance monitoring in Module 7 checks for compliance with agreed standards. For example, does the water quality meet national standards? So its focus is on the quality of the final water. They're both testing water in some cases, but for a totally different reason.
Very good. That's clear, Daryl. Thank you. Okay, so once again, let's check in on our WSP knowledge. We'll have another breakout room activity. So once again, I'll explain to you now what your task will be once you're transported to your breakout rooms. So once again, we'll take out a sheet of paper, and this time we'll write the numbers 1 through 7, which you can do now if you'd like to get started. Then when we're in our groups, we'll match each key term to its definition by writing the correct letter next to each of those numbers. Let's have a look. So on the left, we have a table with definitions of key terms. And on the right, we have Post-it notes with the corresponding terms, which are lettered A, B, C, D through G. So your task is to match the terms and the definitions. So for example, the first definition in the table is something that prevents or eliminates a hazard or reduces it to an acceptable level. So the term I'm looking for here is control measure. So if I look at the Post-it notes on the right, I see that control measure is assigned the letter G. In your groups, you will write the letter G next to the number 1 on your sheet of paper, as shown here on the slide. So there's no need to draw the table or to write out any of the terms. All you'll be writing is the numbers 1 through 7 and the letters A through G beside those numbers. So as before, the instructions that I just presented are available in your activity PDF that Daryl shared at the start of the session. So you'll need that. And when you open it up, please refer to activity number 2. So Daryl will now send you to your rooms, and once again, you'll have 8 minutes to complete this activity. And again, Daryl will send a 2-minute warning before the session expires. So we'll see you soon.
Welcome back. We're just going to go through the answers here. I hope you all agree that a control measure, G, is something that prevents or eliminates a hazard or reduces it to an acceptable level, because that was given on the screen anyway. So I hope you all got that one right. So the next one is number 2 in the table. What is an event or situation that introduces a hazard or fails to remove them? Now, the word event there should have been a hint to you and helped you. And these are, of course, hazardous events. And assigning risk levels based on likelihood and severity, which is the next row, is known as risk assessment, which is A and the Post-it notes. And routine monitoring by the supplier to confirm control measures are working properly is, of course, operational monitoring, which is F. And note that this operational monitoring includes water quality testing and visual inspections. It's not just taking samples. It's using your eyes sometimes. And checking the WSP as a whole is working is verification, which is B, and not to be confused, of course, with validation, which is F, which is confirming a control measure is capable of effectively doing its job. Now, I like to call validation control measure validation because it always helps me remember that validation is always linked to a control measure. So hopefully this leaves D, compliance monitoring. And yes, that makes sense. Compliance monitoring checks for compliance with drinking water quality standards. Now, how did you go? Let's do a really quick poll again. Poll number 2. Yep. I'll launch that and very quickly say how you went. How many did you get correct? Okay, congratulations. You can see that most of you, so 90% of those that did the poll were quite correct. 7 is the right answer. So I think we've deserved a little break. We're going to have a 5-minute break.
Welcome back, everyone. Daryl and I would like to know how many of you participated in the introductory WSP course on the 29th of October. So Daryl, in just a moment here, is going to launch a poll. Okay, oh, nearly 90%. Okay, terrific. So the vast majority of you were here with us for that introductory course. So welcome back. Daryl, it looks like you didn't scare the group off. They've come back for more.
Well, that's really good. I'm glad to hear that.
So Daryl, before we move away from WSP review and begin to talk about auditing specifically, would you like to share any reflections from that training event?
Certainly, I'd love to do that. So thanks very much for the 28 people that actually submitted the assessment quiz last week, and overall the results were quite encouraging. So what I've done is I've selected the questions where the response showed there was perhaps some misunderstanding by a few people in the hope that that will clarify some of these issues. Now let's look at number 12 of the assessment. The statement in number 12 was a typical control measure in a water distribution pipe network is monitoring the residual chlorine every week. Now, this statement is false. However, 22% of people who responded said it was true. And this statement highlights a really critical point to understand about control measures. The statement said that monitoring of something, it happened to be chlorine residual in this case, is a control measure. Well, monitoring is not in itself a control measure. What monitoring does is provide information and data, but it does not itself remove or eliminate a hazard or reduce the likelihood of a hazardous event, which is what a control measure does. For example, by illustrating this principle in this particular case, monitoring the chlorine residual doesn't actually directly eliminate the biological hazards that the chlorination is designed for. And while it's necessary to monitor the concentration of residual chlorine, the control measure in this case is actually to maintain a predefined residual. And that's not monitoring. Monitoring just tells you what it is. So it's a really important principle, and it's a good thing to bear in mind, particularly for auditors. Bottom line, monitoring itself is not a control measure. This statement, water tankers that are only used occasionally, for example, during water shortages because of pipeline breakages, need to be included in a system description. That's true, but 11% said it was false. So even though these water tankers are only used occasionally, it's important to include them in a system description because when they are used, they are part of the distribution system. Including it in the system description helps understanding, for example, of how they are used, how they are filled with water, how they are cleaned, how people collect water from them, etc. And this helps you better understand their vulnerabilities and therefore you're in a much better position to do a risk assessment. So you must include every part of your system, even if it's only occasionally used. Now, in statement number 7, a system description should only describe the parts of the system that the water supplier has complete control over. Well, that's false, but 15% of people said they thought it was true. So let's take the classic example of this, where a water supplier often has little direct control over activities in a catchment. However, it's really important to understand what actually happens in the catchment, even though you don't have control over it, so that the risk can be managed in the catchment, even when the risk management is under the control of external stakeholders like farmers or catchment management authority. The WSP team needs to understand where its water comes from and the risks in the catchment. So you need to include that in your system description. Statement number 19. Operational monitoring should mainly include testing or observations that are easy to incorporate into normal operations. That's true, but 11% of people said it was false. We need and want operational monitoring to be routinely happening. Operational monitoring happens every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes continuously. Operational monitoring should be relatively easy to perform because you want it to be routine, and it should be rapid. That is, you get quick results so that you can make responses to things quickly. So that's operational monitoring, routine and normal day-to-day activity. Number 26, select which of the two are following about statements. A and B, the green ones, were the only correct ones, but B was incorrect, and some people said that. B says, receiving operational monitoring data, which is outside of the predefined acceptable limits, should be a trigger for reviewing a WSP. This statement is not true. You don't have to review the WSP because you get some operational data which is outside of those limits. Remember this diagram we showed last week. Expect that occasionally operational monitoring will show the control is outside of the predefined acceptable limits. That's the sad face with the red no. When this happens, it gives the WSP team warning that the control measure is not operating as intended. And then you can correct things before there becomes a real problem. This doesn't mean that the WSP needs to be reviewed. Now, you may want to review it if this was happening often and very frequently, or the regularity was increasing. But normally, something goes wrong occasionally, and it goes into that little red face, the sad face, that you don't have to review the WSP. In fact, it gives you confidence that things are working from a projection point of view, just as you wanted. Number 1, once again, the question was choose which of the following are reported benefits. And the box I've highlighted says, WSPs achieve consistent, safe, and acceptable, adequate water for all consumers very soon after the first WSP is developed. Now, a few people thought that was true, and it isn't true. The incorrect part of that statement says that these things will be achieved very soon after the first WSP is developed. And I want to clarify that these things you're doing in WSPs generally take time. So don't expect like a magic wand that you do your first WSP and everything is under control straight away. It will take time to build that up as a general rule. And finally, number 4, which of the following should be included in a WSP system description? And the one I've highlighted is incorrect. This one here said, oh, you need to have really detailed, long lists of pipe assets. Well, you don't need to. You might need some details of pipe assets, but providing too much asset data, like I've seen WSPs with 10 pages of every pipe in the whole system telling me how old it was, what the condition was, how deep it was, and so on. but it wasn't giving me any real sense of, well, what is that telling me about it? Little comment or analysis was given. So the system description, its purpose is to highlight implications of all that information, but you're not expecting to see 20 pages of long lists of everything with no comment about that. And I think on that, we will move on. I hope that clarifies some issues. So now we move on from WSP review, and we begin finally, you'll be pleased to know, to talk about WSP auditing. And we'll begin by asking you a few questions. So we're going to have a little quiz before we do our training, which I'm going to send you a link for this very soon, and that will just check what you know now already. It's a pre-training quiz, but don't worry, you're not expected to know any of this information yet. This is just an assessment of your baseline knowledge. When I launch this quiz, if you do not know an answer, you can skip it. You can go back between questions. You can navigate between them.
So welcome back, everyone. I hope no one is feeling at all discouraged by not knowing too many of the answers, if there were some unfamiliar ones. As Daryl mentioned, no one is expected to know any of these answers yet. This was just for baseline purposes to allow us to measure how much we learn over the coming days. Daryl, remember, you'll be toiling away in the background now to try to help us generate a class average score.
Which I have already, so.
Oh, well, fantastic. Okay, we'll just need it in just a moment. So now we'll begin to discuss WSP auditing. During this audit overview session, we will discuss what is auditing, why should we audit, who carries out the audits, when to audit, and then how to generally approach WSP auditing for most effective results. So firstly, what is auditing? A WSP audit is an independent and systematic check of a WSP to confirm its completeness, its adequate implementation in practice, and its effectiveness. Now, independent is in red here because it's a really important word for WSP auditing. Independence avoids conflicts of interest, and it also allows for objectivity in auditing. You'll likely recognize this as the first question from your pre-training quiz. Speaking of which, Daryl, it sounds like you have that class average score for us. How did we do on average?
Okay, so there were 37 people did the Socrative quiz, who've hopefully they're all back in the room now. We got 56% class average overall.
Fantastic. That's actually better than I would have expected, given that we haven't covered this content yet. So that's a really impressive starting point. And I think it reflects the fact that we have a lot of people among us with a lot of audit experience already. So for day 5, as Daryl mentioned, we'll take the very same quiz again and we'll compare our scores. So I suggest we set a goal for ourselves to do on average 20% higher. Let's go for 75% on day 5. Let's see if we can meet that goal.
We're raising the bar, Angela.
I know we are.
And everybody should have got their own result when they closed the Socrative quiz, so they should know what score they got if they
Okay.
got out of it. So they might be able to self-check against themselves, but they're a smart group of people, obviously.
Yes, clearly. Okay, so why audit? Why is it important to carry out WSP auditing? There are a number of reasons. We'll go through a few of them. One reason is that WSPs adhere to the rule of GIGO. You may recall from Daryl's training on the 29th of October what GIGO means. GIGO means garbage in, garbage out. So WSPs can bring many benefits, or they can bring very few benefits. It's only strong, well-implemented WSPs that really bring the most benefit. And auditing has a key role to play in making sure that WSPs are effective. Auditing helps make for good quality water safety planning. Other reasons to audit is that auditing supports continuous improvement of the water safety plan. It also supports WSP sustainability by providing a mechanism for water supplier accountability and incentive. And it supports confirmation of regulatory compliance. If WSPs are required, auditing is necessary to make sure that water suppliers are complying. Incidentally, we have some new data that some folks might be interested in on the number of countries with formal water safety plan policies or regulations in place. So that's policies or regulations that promote or require water safety planning, generally at a national scale. And that number is now up to 62 countries, including many of your countries. Another driver for water safety planning is that it is a key element of drinking water quality surveillance. Now, a lot of people tend to think of surveillance as water quality testing, but that's only part of it. So WHO defines two arms of surveillance. One is direct testing of water quality, but also an auditing arm, which includes WSP auditing. Remember that while water quality testing to confirm compliance with drinking water quality standards is of course very important, it also has significant limitations. It's limited in space and time, it can be expensive, and it's reactive. By the time contamination is detected in a water supply system, the problem has already occurred and consumers have already been exposed. So surveillance programs really need to balance water quality testing with checks to ensure proactive risk management by the water supplier to make sure that water is safe at all times. And that means water safety plan auditing as part of surveillance. And last but not least, auditing is part and parcel of water safety plan implementation. So step 7 of water safety planning, as you may recall, is verification. Remember when we reviewed the verification triangle at the start of the session. So part of verification is WSP auditing, the orange triangle on this slide. And that means that implementing a water safety plan, every water safety plan, involves WSP auditing as a matter of course. That's why audit. Now let's talk about who audits. Who should carry out a WSP audit? Well, the answer depends on the type of audit. It could be an internal, external, formal, or informal audit. Internal auditing is carried out by the water supplier or someone who's contracted by the water supplier. External auditing is carried out by a government body or another entity who's not employed by the water supplier. Informal auditing tends to be focused on mentoring and support and strengthening WSP development and implementation, whereas formal audits are focused on compliance from a regulatory or an organizational quality control perspective. So there's many types of WSP audits, and this training applies to all of them. Note that whether a water safety plan audit is internal or external to the water supplier, it should be carried out by someone who is independent of the WSP team, someone who's not on the WSP team. So water safety plan team members are typically not well placed to identify the key gaps or the weaknesses in their own water safety plans. So independent audits offer the benefits of fresh eyes and objectivity. So we have with us a water safety plan expert from Yarra Valley Water in Victoria, Australia, Asoka. Welcome, Asoka. Asoka will be familiar to many of you folks that are joining us here today. So thanks, Asoka, so much for being here and sharing your time with us. Hi, Asoka. Welcome.
Yeah,
Thank
hi.
you so much for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of this interesting, challenging training session. Good morning, good afternoon. It's from wherever you are joining from.
So Asoka, can you please tell us something about water safety planning at Yarra Valley Water, including your own role in water safety planning?
Sure. So Yarra Valley Water started water safety plans on 15th of December 1999, a long time ago. And when we started, it was voluntary. There were no regulations. There were no real requirements. We wanted to supply safe drinking water to customers 100% of the time. So that was the drive from our management. In 2005, it became law, or in 2003, but in 2005, the state of Victoria in Australia issued safe drinking water regulations. That means we operate under the law. So every water authority in Victoria, we have 18 of them, must have a water safety plan, and it must be audited by a certified auditor. So I know probably you're interested to know that as well. So it has become business as usual for us. Everyone in the business who have something to do with water supply is aware of water safety plan. So my role, this is important thing. My role is I own the water safety plan. I'm responsible for implementation. I can't give the response. I can't handball things to other people. I'm responsible for development at the original phase, implementation, ongoing implementation, internal and auditing, make sure we get those done, and also we get value out of that, and many other things that's relevant to the improvement plan, driving water safety plan implementation. So the responsibilities, I think, the key thing.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. So you mentioned that Yarra Valley Water is subject to regulatory auditing by certified auditors. Do you also practice internal auditing of your water safety plan?
So that's a good question. Internal auditing is very, very important. We do a lot of internal audits. So we at least once a year, we do a formal internal audit that is performed by an independent person. You mentioned the word independent in red in your slides, right? I think that is critical. I can't go and audit my own water safety plan. Yeah, I can review it, but I can't audit it because I'm not independent. I could be biased. So we have independent set of auditors that who does our auditing. We are quite unique in this sense. So our organization decided to get our internal audits, not only water safety plans, the entire management system audits done by a third party. So it's totally independent. We treat this as serious as an external audit. In fact, internal audits are much more valuable to me to prepare for the external audits. When I get to the external audit, I'm ready, right? So internal audits are very, very important in that sense.
Thank you, Asoka. Yeah, it makes sense that they would be really valuable in preparing for an external audit. You mentioned that you do the internal auditing annually. And is external auditing, how often typically are you audited externally?
Yeah, so again, a good question. My usual answer is we get audited to death. All right. So internal audits, it's annual. External audits, we also are certified to the food safety standards of HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. And that's when we started in 1999. So we get what we call recertification or surveillance audits annually, right? On top of that, every 2 years, under the regulations, we must audit our water safety plan by a completely different certified auditor. So every 2 years, I get audited 3 times, but otherwise at least twice. But also we do conduct what we call spot audits, which sits under the auditing framework that we have in Yarra Valley Water. We have what we call compliance officers. They go and audit what happens in the field unannounced. They just go there. We use very standard questions, software. You enter the information, right? That covers not only WSP, but everything else as well. So there are specific questions related to, for example, contamination, contamination prevention related to water safety plan. There's a link to water safety plan in that question. When I say what's the link, the auditors or the compliance officers know this question is related to this, and they often come back to me and say, Asoka, what about this question? I think we haven't covered the spectrum. Or I go and talk to them and say, well, let's look at the question. So it is totally independent because most of our field work's performed by our contractors, or we call partners. So those audits are also totally independent, and you have 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, your contract is in real trouble. They get blacklisted and they could lose their contract.
Okay. Okay, Asoka, very interesting. Thank you so much for telling us a bit about auditing at your organization. It sounds like you're very familiar with auditing, maybe even more so than you'd like to be, getting audited
Yes.
to death as you are, but much appreciated. Thank you for your time and explaining that.
And also very quickly, we did our recertification audit 2 weeks ago completely remotely.
Okay, and it was a successful outcome?
Of course.
Terrific. Okay, thanks
All
again
right.
for your time, Asoka.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we've talked about why audit, who should audit. We heard a bit about how auditing works at Yarra Valley Water in Australia. So now let's talk about when to carry out an audit. And the answer to that depends on the type and the purpose of an audit. So according to this table, there's sort of chart that you see on the slide here, generally informal audits will be carried out in the early stages of developing and implementing a water safety plan. And the purpose is to encourage and support and to correct any misunderstandings, fill knowledge gaps, to try to set water safety plan development on the right course. Now, formal audits tend to be carried out a bit later, for example, after the first year, to allow time for water safety plans to become more mature and established. So for external formal audits, timing will be as specified in regulations. Asoka mentioned that I think that's every 2 years at Yarra Valley Water. And for internal formal audits, timing will be as per water supplier's own requirements. In the case of Yarra Valley Water, they do that at least annually by the sounds of it. The last topic for today under auditing is just how to approach water safety plan auditing. And in my view, this is as or more important than anything else. So auditors really need to understand that being audited can be very stressful. And auditors should help water suppliers understand that audits are a learning opportunity and they support continuous improvement. So no matter how good a water safety plan is, there's always room to further improve it. And approaching water safety plans as an auditor, as this learning and improvement opportunity, not a policing activity, is critical to ensuring that they do drive this continued water safety plan strengthening. So lastly, just a few words on terminology and tone. So in this training, we use the term audit. And in a lot of places, this is the appropriate term to use. But remember that the terminology that's used can be modified to best suit the context. I've worked in a number of countries where it's not the preferred term. There's associations with the term audit that don't work well for this context. So where appropriate for internal or for early informal audits, for example, you can consider using different words. You might use independent assessment or a water safety plan support visit for an early informal audit. And getting the right language can really help foster this openness and collaboration. So it's worth bearing in mind, because the more open and collaborative an audit can be, the more beneficial that it will be. Daryl, it looks like we have just enough time to do this last poll before we sign off for the day.
So this, we've got a question for you. And the question is, what is the key difference between an audit and a review? And the answer is not that they are spelt differently, okay? We're asking something a little deeper than that. And to help you think about this, here's a reminder of verification. That is module 7. The triangle shows the 3 elements of verification. Remember, we have consumer satisfaction, compliance monitoring, and auditing. And modules 10 and 11 are about reviewing and updating the WSP. So the question is, what is the key difference between an audit and a review? And you'll find in the poll, there will be 3 answers you can choose from. I'm going to launch the poll. Here we go. Okay, so let's discuss each of these options one by one. Okay, the first one says that the difference is the purpose, and then it says that reviews are about improvement and audits about enforcement. Well, it is true that some audits are concerned about enforcing regulations, but both audits and reviews are fundamentally about improvements in the WSP. So A is not correct. Okay, no one's got B right, so that's good. And C, we think that's the best response because reviews are carried out by the WSP team and audits by different actors. This is related to the fact that of the independent nature of audits. WSP teams can do a review anytime themselves, like Ahsoka was just saying, but an audit is done by people outside of the WSP team itself. They are independent, and that's really the big issue. So congratulations. That's all for today, folks. A couple of things before we go. I hope you've had a good day, interesting and informative, a few technical challenges along the way. Just a reminder that I'll keep the meeting open for a few minutes. If you want to ask a question, you can use the chat function. And tomorrow morning when we meet, we'll look at the questions and we'll hopefully get some time to talk about a few of these tomorrow to answer those questions. So now leave the room yourself. And if you've got a couple more minutes, if you want to type a chat question, and we'll look at that after the meeting's finished. Thank you very much and bye-bye. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.